Good morning. We welcome you to worship this Thursday, our last virtual gathering before Holy Week begins. This season in the Christian year carries deep meaning for people of faith around the world. Since we, like communities of faith almost everywhere, are marking this season at a physical distance, we have set aside this time this morning to pray, to sing, and to meditate together. May we allow our worship to turn our hearts towards one another and towards the divine. Please join us now in singing our hymn, Gather Us In.
Here in this place, new light is streaming. Now is the darkness banished away. See in this space our fears and our dreamings, brought here to you in the light of this day. Gather us in, our lost and forsaken. Gather us in, the blind and the lame. Call to us now, and we shall awaken. We shall arise at the sound of our name. We are the young, our lives are a mystery. We are the old who yearn for your face. We have been sung throughout all of history, called to be light to the whole human race. Gather us in, the rich and the haughty. Gather us in, the proud and the strong. Give us a heart so meek and so lowly. Give us the courage to enter the song. Not in the dark of buildings confining, not in some heaven light years away, but here in this space the new light is shining. Now is the kingdom, now is the day. Gather us in and hold us forever. Gather us in and make us your own. Gather us in, all peoples together. Fire of love in our flesh and our bone.
Hi. Is there Dr. Copeland?
Yep. We seem to be having some technical issues.
Okay. What are you thinking?
I think we can forge ahead. I can hear audio fine.
Okay.
Well, I tell you what, if we do get furloughed, it'll give me a real chance to figure out next steps.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe when they come and talk about
I know. Well, I'm thinking the same thing, you know?
You know?
Okay, can everybody hear me okay? Okay, I saw a thumbs up, so that's a good sign. I think it's my turn. We're having a little bit of technical difficulties, but if the audio is working, the audio is what we need. I was asked today to read an Islamic mystical poem. That's what I was asked to do. Three significant words there: Islamic mystical poem. We could talk for about an hour about each one of those words, which I'm more than happy to do, but I understand we don't have 3 hours just to get started. So how do I do it briefly? I think first about Islam, I think it's a reasonable question to ask. Why read an Islamic poem for a worship service at a Christian divinity school? I could say a lot of things, but I would say it like this, that imagine you have a friend, and you have a friend who doesn't think the same way as you about everything. They don't see the world entirely the same way that you do. They don't believe necessarily everything that you believe, but they're your friend. And they are a good person. You know they're a good person. They are a kind person. You know that. And they say to you, you know, my life is about getting closer to God. And I would say you have a friend like that, and you're lucky indeed. You should listen to that person, and you indeed will learn from that person. So this is the way it is, I think, between Christians and Muslims. Now, poetry, another important word. Why poetry? I think as human beings, again and again, we are trying to put things into words, and we're trying to put the inexpressible into language. And we find this is difficult or possible. And what poetry is, it's an effort to push against the boundaries of language, to try and stretch the limits of language, to capture our experience and express some of our inner why poetry is powerful. This is why it's important. And so my recommendation is to read as much poetry as you can, always when you can. Go to a website, go to poets.org. They have a poem every day. I think you should go and read these poems. So this is poetry. This is Islam, mysticism. Well, I'm going to read a poem from a woman named Rabia. Here we have some images. Rabia Adawiya, Rabia Basri, Adawiya being her a name derived from her lineage, and Basri being a name derived from geography, from where she lived. She lived, you can see there, right around the 8th century in the Western calendar, just about 100 years after the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Who was Rabia? Rabia was a Sufi. She was an early Sufi saint. What's a Sufi? A Sufi is a person who is in love with God. And when I say that, I mean madly in love with God, radically in love with God. Think about a time in your life when you were absolutely 100% in love with someone. I mean, consumed with another person. You go to bed at night, you're thinking about them. You wake up in the morning, you are thinking about them. This is the way it was with Rabia and God. Rabia said that everyone else was alone in their room at night they were with their beloved, right? And she is in her room and she says to God, "Here I am, I'm alone with you." Rabia was seen walking through her town and she had a bucket of water in one hand and a torch in the other. And someone says to her, "Why do you have these things?" And she says, "The water is to put out the fire of hell, and the torch is to burn down heaven." For Rabia, she didn't love God because she was scared of hell. And she didn't love God because she wanted to get into heaven. She loved God because she loved God, because she was 100% consumed with the love of God. And, I think, what if it were like that for us? That's the example she sets for us. Now, that said, I want to turn to a poem from Rabia, which I will read. Title of the poem is "In My Soul." And we have some of the on the screen there. So I'm going to read it aloud slowly. And then what we're going to do is sit with it for just a moment. So I'm going to read it aloud slowly. We'll sit with it for a moment. And then what I would recommend you do is read the poem aloud yourself. So I'll read it first, and then you read it aloud to yourself. And then once we've done all that, over in the chat function, we can type to each other. I'd like you to be brave and just identify some words that jump out at you or some themes, some ideas from the poem, and you can put it over there in the chat function. There are no wrong answers. Whatever inspires you is a right thing to put there. Okay. So I'll read first. In my soul, there is a temple, a shrine, a mosque, a church where I kneel. Prayer should bring us to an altar where no walls or names exist. Is there not a region of love where the sovereignty is illumined nothing, where ecstasy gets poured into itself and becomes lost, where the wing is fully alive but has no mind or body? In my soul, there is a temple, a shrine, a mosque, a church that dissolve in God. Okay. Slide back there, perfect. So again, what I want you to do is read the poem aloud wherever you're at. Okay. So thank you for doing that. It's important to read poetry aloud. So if you followed my advice and go to read a poem every day, which I surely think you should do, I also would want you to read it out loud. Now, we've read the poem, we've seen the poem. What I would like you to do, if you're feeling brave, is to say in the chat some of the ideas from the poem, some of the words, some things that jump out at you from the text. If you can't see the chat, you go to a view, I think, to open it up. Good, because some answers coming in. Wow. So the idea of no walls, dissolving into God, it's been mentioned several times. The idea of illumined nothing, that's quite interesting. This is oftentimes in Sufi poetry, there are these paradox statements where you think of illumined nothing. The Christian author Pseudo Dionysius talks about the dazzling darkness. Dr. Hicks says that these things can reside in your soul, my soul. Yes, indeed. The annihilation of the self, sort of peeling away the illusions of the self. Ecstasy being poured into itself. That's very interesting, I think, as well. This idea that I was talking earlier about this powerful, overwhelming experience of love, and how when you're feeling that way, it does seem to pour into itself. It fuels itself, that you sort of spiral more and more into that experience, which is like being a wing. Where I kneel, that's important as well. And this notion of what is the right relationship to God. And for Rabia, as a Muslim, the right relationship to God is submission, it's worship. And more so, the right relationship to God is love. She says, I love not because I want heaven, not because I fear hell, but because I'm a human being and it's right for me to love God. What more could I do? Now, I want to look at this just a moment myself. I'm going to tell you a secret, so be ready. I'm going to tell you a secret. Because we ask ourselves, where is God, right? Where does God live? God is on the mountaintop. God is at the temple. God's at the shrine, the mosque. God's at the church. God is somewhere else. God is distant. God's at the end of a long journey. God is transcendent. God is so immense and mighty that he's far away from me. I'm minuscule. And here's the secret. The secret that Rabia knew is that distance is an illusion. Rabia knew the Quran, and the Quran tells us that God is closer than our jugular vein. Christian scripture tells us that Christ is all in all. So seeking God, seeking the presence of God does not mean that you have to make a physical journey. You don't even have to leave your house. It's something you can do where you're sitting right now. Why? Because distance from God is an illusion. And illusions we can strip away. And we can do work such that illusions are burned away and we are confronted with what's really real. And what's really real about you and me is the divine. And that's something Rabia understood. And let me be careful so that I don't mislead you. This is not just an individual message. It's not just about your inner life. I read a headline today. It said, humans are not good at social distancing. And that's true. Right now, we have to follow guidelines to do what's best to keep everyone safe, but we're not made to be socially distant from each other. Because we are made for love. We're made for the same kind of radical love that Rabia knew. And we long for each other when we are forced to be physically distant. But this, in some ways, is an illusion too, because we're never truly distant from each other. If we subsist in that same sovereign love, that same divine love that's holding all things together, then we are as close to each other as we are to God. And so what Rabia understood is that through love of the divine, through love of each other, we come closer and closer, or more aware of how close we already are to God. And this is the logic of love for Rabia. And I think it's an important message for us now. So when I reflect back on her, this is what I bear in mind: the power of that radical love, because that's what makes us fully human. This is what we were made for. And as Augustine says, God made us for God's self, and we will not rest until we return to God. How do you make this return in this life? You come to it through love. So love, and more love. That's the legacy of Rabia. Amen.
Amen. Good morning, everyone. I hope that everyone can hear me. The song that I will sing today is entitled "We Are One." I think it's a song that speaks to this time that we're in right now as we are away from our community. But I think it's a great tune because it reminds us that even though we are apart, we're still connected by God and through God. So here we go. It says, "We are one. We are one. We are one. In the spirit, we are one. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. We are one in the spirit. We are one. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord. We are one in the spirit. Thank you, Lord. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. We are one in the spirit. We are one. We are one. We are one. We are one in the Spirit. We are one. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. We are one in the Spirit. We are one. Amen.
Friends, thank you so much for being with us today, for sticking through the technical difficulties especially. We're so glad that you were here with us for worship. As has been our practice the last couple of worship sessions, you'll be invited to join a breakout room at the end of this big group meeting where you can catch up with some of our community members in groups of 4 or 5. So stick around, please, and just check in on your community. To close us off today, in the spirit of Dr. Canzona's reflection today, I wanted to ask you, what are some of the things that you're missing right now? It struck me as we were talking about the fact that in my soul there is a church, that a lot of us are going to be missing our churches on Sunday morning and all through Holy Week. And so I want to hear from you. Just write in the chat below, like, what is the thing? It could be small, it could be big, that you are missing today, the experiences that you are missing today. For me, it's the chance to go to a friend's house and have tea. That's what I do when I'm home, and I haven't been able to do it because of social distancing rules. Anyone else want to share? Yeah. We're missing face-to-face conversations, students, being in your office, normalcy, schedules, community, hugs, parties. Thank you. Thank you, friends. There is so much. There is so much to miss in these moments, but I want to offer to you an affirmation as a blessing this morning. So the affirmation is going to be taken from the text of the poem. You're going to say, "In my soul, there is," and then I want you to fill in that blank with whatever it is that you need. Remind yourself that you, within you, have the capacity to foster these communities and these connections, even when we are at a distance. So I'll give you a second to think about what you're going to fill in that blank with, and join me. In my soul, there is love. Amen. Go in peace, friends.